It was a creed written into the founding documents that declared the destiny of a nation. Yes, we can. It was whispered by slaves and abolitionists as they blazed the trail toward freedom. Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
It was sung.
It was sung by immigrants as they struck out to distant shores, pioneers who pushed westward against unforgiving wilderness. Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
It was the call of workers organized, women who reached for the ballots, a president who chose the moon as our new frontier,
and a king who took us to the mountaintop and pointed the way to the promised land.
From WBRN Radio in Boston on the Boston Red Network, the Monday Morning Quarterback on the 25th of September 2017. No doubt this is a Monday morning to not forget what happened in the National Football League on Sunday. The Colin Kaepernick protests went virtual. That's a new word we use these days. In that football is a collective sport, thus the teams became involved, most of the teams, and we'll talk about the teams, their involvement. We'll also talk about the historic manner in which protests in the U.S. have taken place back to the 1968 Olympics. The Washington Post has a very good story on that particular issue. But first we'll go back to an old news item, the travel ban. Yes, the travel ban expired on Sunday, and DJ Trump now has a new travel ban. Some of it is obviously does not make any sense at all. He expanded it to the Democratic Republic of Korea, Venezuela, and Chad, expanding to 8 for a list of countries covered by the original travel ban. Now this was cover to get out of Iran, Libya, Syria, Yemen, and Somalia were left on the old list, now a new list. Restrictions on citizens from Sudan were lifted. The measure helped fulfill a campaign promise. And this has been one of the things that's dogged this administration to tighten U.S. immigration procedures allied with the American First foreign policy, a nationalistic foreign policy. Iraqi citizens will not be subject to travel prohibitions, but will face enhanced security or vetting. The current ban, enacted in March, and of course been to court many times, expired on Sunday evening. The new restrictions are to take effect, on March 18th. The results from a review after Trump's original travel ban sparked outrage, etc. The addition of Democratic Republic of Korea, Venezuela, broadens restrictions from the original mostly Muslim. This is according to Reuters. It was all Muslim there. The administration officials briefing the press acknowledged that Democratic Republic of Korea now travel to the U.S. in very, very low numbers, no doubt about it, primarily to the UN and those sort of things. It was condemned by Amnesty International. Just because the original ban was especially outrageous doesn't mean we should stand for yet another version of the government-sanctioned discrimination, it said in a statement. It is senseless and cruel to ban whole nationalities of people who are often fleeing the same violence that the U.S. government wishes to keep out. The American Civil Liberties Union also issued a statement that the addition of Democratic Republic of Korea and Venezuela doesn't obfuscate the real fact that the administration's order is still a Muslim ban. No doubt about that. How many people from the Democratic Republic of Korea actually show up in the U.S.? Very few. People that are connected with the government show up here occasionally. going to the UN, and that is basically about it. The White House portrayed the restrictions as consequences for countries that might meet new requirements for vetting of immigrants and issuance of visas. The requirements were shared in July with governments which had 50 days to make improvements if needed. I doubt very seriously with Venezuela that that is part of it. A number of countries made improvements by enhancing the security of their travel documents. Now, the addition here, this is from Reuters, had threatened to destroy North Korea if it attacked. President also directed harsh criticism in Venezuela. But this does not make very much sense in the case of Democratic Republic of Korea, where the suspension was sweeping and applied to both immigration and non-immigration. Officials said it's hard for the U.S. to validate the identity of someone coming from there to find out the person was a friend. Well, so they're not coming. Restrictions on Venezuela on the socialist government officials that Trump doesn't like there. From the Bolivarian National Security Service, their immediate families. I doubt very seriously if they're that interested in, as they say, coming here to the U.S. The expiring ban blocked entry into the U.S. by people from the 6 countries. That was for just 90 days. Now, this thing has been litigated. The new ban will be litigated also, period. It went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has opted to duck travel ban ruling. The Trump administration announced Sunday that it's issuing a new travel restriction. There, the new proclamation sets a restriction. Well, anyway, this is sort of now the justices can just skip deciding the case altogether. Well, yeah, the case is actually what is termed a moot. They don't need to decide something that's no longer there. If the court can avoid entering into the fray, it may be appealing to them, no doubt. That is from a law professor at Drexel University, yes, in Philadelphia. And that's basically all there. Suggests the court's 4 liberals and 2 of its conservative majority. That would be Roberts and Anthony Kennedy were keen on a compromise. That's from the decision. The 3 other conservatives, well, they're crazy, so it doesn't matter. The ban should be allowed to go in effect in full. Well, again, it's not going to matter. The ban itself will not go there. Now to the Hopalong Cassidy bill. On the edge of collapse. Senator McCain has basically done that in the latest effort. Now, they've been adding to this by the minute, quite literally. Several senators voiced a concern about the bill under consideration. This is again from Reuters. The Senate is up against a Saturday deadline, period. Otherwise, they have to go to 60 votes, which would oddly make it utterly impossible. The GOP controls the Senate 52 to 48, finding it difficult to even clear the hurdle. The Finance Committee is scheduled to hold a meeting later today on Monday in an attempt to build support for the bill. Oh, boy. For 7 years they've been at this, 7 years of wasted time. Opposition grew on Sunday to the plan by Hopalong Cassidy and Graham. It'll take federal money from Medicaid, that's for the poor and disabled. That's been around 50 years, as well as subsidies to help Americans buy private insurance. And that would be sent out in block grants. The latest addition to this, and these people are not very trustworthy. Ted Line Cruz, speaking at an event in Texas, warned Sunday that Old man McConnell could not count on his vote. Susan Collins, she was on CNN, said it was difficult for her. She said the same thing. She was also on Face the Nation. If we have time, we'll put that in. She worried about cuts to Medicaid. From Chuck Schumer dismissed the latest effort to rise the bill and add money for few states, calling it as bad as those states and the rest of the states, because it still contains a massive cut to Medicaid. That's what this is all about. To give Alaska extra money itself is a scheme, no doubt about it. Free Republican defections would kill it. And so far we have Senator McCain and perhaps Rand Paul, the Libertarian. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office is expected to produce a preliminary analysis of Hopalong Cassidy that would assess the bill's impact on the budget deficit. That could happen today. More time is needed for a complete assessment of it. Despite deep skepticism, Graham pledged to keep pushing the legislation. Well, this is literally a waste of time, period. State-by-state impact from the Hopalong Cassidy bill would vary, but some of the states whose senators are undecided would stand to lose funding. That's according to the Axiom News site. And this is a study cited by the central organization, the Center for Medicaid and Medicare and Medicaid Services. That's a unit of the Department of Health and Human Services. The study found that in 2026, Alaska would lose 38% of its federal funding for the subsidy and Medicaid. Both Alaskan senators are still on the fence. Well, even with special help for the bill, they would still lose it. And the American Cancer Society is now entered with the American Medical Association, Heart Association, AARP. They all oppose the bill. That tells you the gravity here that is in play. A very, very rough political environment for Hopalong Cassidy. And because of the rough political environment, this puts the people where they really don't want to be, period. Let me start this off. This is what the flag stands for. This is from the Washington Post. I guess we'll read this editorial and then we'll go to 1968. Or we'll just read a little bit of it. You won't really get into the whole editorial. And there is a lot of confusion. In 1943, with the nation mobilized for war against fascism, school children in West Virginia were required each morning to salute the American flag. The purpose seemingly unexceptionable and in fact not objected to by many, was the teaching and fostering and perpetuating the idea and principles of spirit of Americanism. Now, this is a very important case here that every constitutional law student learns. However, to Jehovah's Witnesses, the flag was an image which, under their religious beliefs, their children were forbidden to salute. Students refused to do so, and they were expelled from school. Parents were persecuted. Eventually, the case reached the Supreme Court. In West Virginia, State Board of Education versus Barnett. Justice Jackson, who later would be at the International Court trying Nazis, wrote for 6-3 majority that the state could not compel students to salute the flag. Reversing a court decision from just 3 years earlier, Justice Jackson wrote that in the midst of war, what remains one of the enduring statements of confidence in what truly makes America great, to believe that patriotism will not flourish if patriotic ceremonies are voluntary and spontaneous instead of a compulsory routine. He wrote, to make an unflattering estimate of the appeal of our institutions to free minds, What brings this to mind is, of course, DJ Trump. The first incrimination, which he started calling people SOBs and waxing nostalgia for the days when more concussions were inflicted for the entertainment of football fans, and is to look away. It is embarrassing, after all, to have to explain to children that we have a president who speaks so rudely. It plays into the diversion he may seek when he finds himself in by Mr. Ung, otherwise known as Smart Cookie, or Senator McCain. But we shouldn't worry about more important things: health care, tax reform, the inundation of Puerto Rico, and the dangers of a nuclear war. But when Trump tweets that players should stop disrespecting our flag and country, it becomes clear in some way there is nothing more important than his misguided understanding of how to truly respect the flag. Some NFL players have participated in a frugal and challenging debate about race and politics and criminal justice. Trump is offended by this. His response: fire the players who don't share his view, demands a conformity and uniformity. He is not alone, of course. If he were, Colin Kaepernick, who has started this, would probably have a job now. But the response to Trump's ugly tweets and threats from players and team owners reflect an encouraging consensus, and this is what football is. Football is a team sport, whether or not the owners are or not. The real way to respect the flag is to respect the diversity of opinion in its protests. As the games began on Sunday, players, coaches, and owners kneeled, linked arms, and made statements in other ways. Our players have exercised their rights as U.S. citizens in order to spark conversation and action to address social justice. That is from the owner of the San Francisco 49ers, Jed York. We will continue to support them in their peaceful pursuit of positive change in our country and around the world. What offends Trump here is not what is offensive, is not what DJ Trump thinks about Colin Kaepernick. Colin Kaepernick's mother incidentally responded to the SOB part of it. At this point, honestly, who cares? But when the president uses a bully's pulpit to declare some speech legitimate and some beyond the pale, when this response to protests is to question the patriotism rather than engage in the issue of unequal policing, then it is DJ Trump who disrespects the flag and our country. As Justice Jackson wrote 3/4 century ago, if there is any fixed star in our constitutional consolation, it is that no official, high or petty, can prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of opinion, or force citizens to confess by word of act their faith therein. That was Justice Jackson, who later presided over the Nuremberg trials. Good to bring the history in. Let's go to 1968. This is involved protests at the Olympics, and this was not, as they say, a surgical situation. This was known as a Black Power salute by Mr. Tommy Smith and John Carlos, who suffered recriminations, etc., and still do. The Star Spangled Banner ring out in the stadiums across the country, and in London, the Ravens played the Jacksonville Jaguars, and again, from London it came, but the Olympians who won the gold and bronze respectively in the 2,000-meter sprint raised black gloves during the ceremony. That was in 1968 in Mexico City. The protest had been something the two athletes carefully planned. As Smith and Carlos walked to the podium, they took off their shoes to protest poverty. They wore beads and a scarf to protest lynching. And when the national anthem was played, they lowered their heads in defiance and raised their fists in the Black Power salute that rocked the world, according to this article. Before the anthem started to play, Carlos recalls later that he thought about the symbols that had been chosen for that moment on the world stage. They knew it would be a moment of truth. And by protesting, they might lose everything. And that's the whole situation there, that people lose things. I looked at my feet in the high socks and thought about all the African-American poverty I've seen from Harlem to East Texas. I fingered my beads and thought about the picture that I've seen of strange fruit hanging from a popular tree in the South. Carlos wrote in 2010 book there. John Carlos' story, the sports movement that changed the world. He had decided to unzip his Olympian jacket in defiance of Olympian etiquette, but in support of all working class people, black and white, in Harlem, who had struggled and worked with their hands all day. He had deliberately covered up USA on his uniform with a black T-shirt to reflect the shame I felt that my country was traveling at a snail's pace towards something that should be obvious to all people of goodwill. Then the anthem started. They raised their fists. They had one pair of gloves between them, so Smith put on a black glove on his right fist and Carlos on his left. And as the anthem began and the crowd saw us raise our fists, the stadium became eerily quiet, Carlos said. For a few seconds you could honestly had heard a frog piss on cotton. I never heard that one before. So, something awkward about hearing 50,000 people go silent, like it was being in the eye of a hurricane. As the national anthem played, the crowd began to boo. Then some people in the crowd started to scream the national anthem. It's like they were saying, "You're anti-American SOBs. We're going to shove the down your throat," Carlos said. Then screamed it to the point that where it seemed less of a national anthem than a barbaric call to arms. The punishment for defying Olympic rules is swift. They were ordered to leave the stadium. That was Mr. Carlos and Mr. Smith. The image of Smith and Carlos' fists, and the Australian sprinter, we won't forget him, Peter Norman, who took the silver in the race, would become secured in history as an incendiary act of protest. They had taken a stand at the moment when the country was also embroiled in protests over the Vietnam War and the aftermath of the assassination of Dr. King and Robert F. Kennedy that the nation had seen on TV. When they returned to the U.S., they were suspended from the track team and received death threats, no doubt. After their track careers, both played in the NFL, but their time on the field was short-lived. Smith played 3 seasons with the Bengals of Cincinnati, according to Track and Field Hall of Fame. Carlos played 1 year with the Philadelphia Eagles and 1 year in the Canadian Football League. Smith, who worked at Santa Monica College as a sociology professor, headed cross country and field track coach, and they were trying to bring attention to the injustice in the U.S. I don't like the idea of people looking at it as negative. Smith said, "There's nothing but a raised fist in the air and a bowed head acknowledging the U.S. flag, not as a symbol of hate for it." Carlos, who worked as a guidance counselor at Palm Springs High School in California, told The Guardian, "I have a moral obligation to step up and the morality was far greater than the rules and regulations had. Now, this is interesting that they did, in fact, get employment, which itself was a miracle. Now, let's move on here. I think we brought up the part about the Hopalong Cassidy and these special things he set out here for Alaska and Maine. Aides to both did not immediately comment, and that is part of the unfortunate situation with the Republican Party. McCoskey and Collins should have came out against this bill at the same time as Senator McCain, and realistically the bill could still pass, but the problem is here that the so-called moderate Republican is gone, period. But Collins was just reelected, so it doesn't really matter, and it would not matter out in there. Now, an hour later, Trump claims he'll win. Well, it may be now, it may be later, but the people will lose. Now or later is the problem. Let me get back to the protests and how it all occurred on a protest Sunday. The kneeling in Detroit, several members of the Tigers knelt while the singer dropped one knee. Rico Valley dropped to one knee and pumped a fist in the air at the end of the performance of the Star Spangled Banner. In Philadelphia, city police officers joined with the Eagles and Giants players and Eagle owner Jerry Laurie to link arms during the anthem in a show of solidarity. Trump said that was okay. While some Americans sympathetic to the protests, others refused to stand as a sign of disrespect for the flag for members of the military who have sacrificed and died defending the country. Well, that in itself has always been an overblown situation since the Great Patriotic War. That was World War II. That people did die defending the country. But when you go to the Korean conflict that is still going today, people that died there, unfortunately, did not die defending the country, period. In Vietnam, they did not die defending the country. Vietnam, the Vietnamese government had showed no threat at all to the U.S. Now there was some sort of mythology running that, well, if Vietnam falls, all of Asia, and thus socialism/communism will come. They all fell, and socialism is there. It didn't affect the U.S. At all because of where the U.S. is today. And if you talk about the other conflicts in Afghanistan, in Iraq had the weapons of mass destruction that did not exist. That does not go into that mythology of defending the country. Iraq posed no threat to the U.S., nor did Afghanistan. So in other words, you can make up conflicts. And in this whole hullabaloo, $700,000 was returned by the NFL to the Treasury of the U.S. This is for patriotic events that were made up, period. So let me just go on with this little dialogue here. This is from Reuters. To the New England Patriots, Kraft, who is one of DJ Trump's cronies. He gave him, in fact, a Super Bowl ring. I'm deeply disappointed by the tone of the comments made by the president on Friday. He said in a statement, he said the players have a right to peaceably affect social change and raise awareness in the manner in which they feel is the most impactful. And from the commissioner And the Players Union, the president did not back down, calling on fans to boycott the league. If NFL fans refuse to go to games until players stop disrespecting the flag and country, you will see change take place. Another tweet, he spent the weekend in New Jersey. This is DJ Trump. The league should back fans who are upset about the protest. Yeah. In Chicago, the feud, I call it the Trump feud here, was a topic at the South Loop Sports Bar. This is the First Amendment issue. The president is supposed to uphold that right. That was from Sam Cunningham, who was watching the Pittsburgh-Chicago game. One patron at a bar in Fort Lauderdale. I guess they're open again. Trump supported Tim Kine. Do it on your time, not when you're wearing the uniform. Well, that is his opinion. He's 67 years old. Foxborough, more than a dozen players is Foxborough, Mass. And coaches on the championship Pats kneeled or linked arms, including the quarterback Tom Brady, who Trump likes to name drop. In Jacksonville, the Jaguars owner there, Mr. Khan, linked arms with players in solidarity at the game against the Baltimore Ravens. It was in Wembley Stadium in London. He is a Pakistani, $1 million to Trump's inaugural fund. Robert McNamara, chairman of the Houston Texans, said Trump's comments were divisive and counterproductive to what our country needs right now. He also donated $1 million. Other teams decided to stay off the field. The Tennessee Titans and Seahawks. Seahawks, of course, lost that game. Except for a single player, the Steelers remained off the field before the Chicago game against the Bears. To avoid playing politics, that's the head coach, Mike Tomlin there. The team was roundly booed by the crowd. Well, so what? And great solidarity for, for the national anthem for our country. Standing with lock arms is good. Oh, that was DJ Trump. Anyway. National Basketball Association, Steve Curry involved there. His jersey sells more than any other one in the National Basketball Association, NBA. And from Oakland, the rookie there, Bruce Maxwell, became the first Major League Baseball player to kneel for the national anthem in protest. And DJ Trump rescinded an invitation to the Golden State Warriors to come to the White House. In Oakland, Mr. Curry told a news conference it's beneath the leader of the country to go that route. In a tweet, Trump said the Pittsburgh Penguins hockey team won the Stanley Cup and accepted an invitation to the White House. We were talking on a different show that it would happen this way. The hockey team would show up. The other players have decided not to show up. This was in Alabama, incidentally, that he was calling people SOBs, campaigning on behalf of Big Luther there, Strange Love. And we'll have that program up. Incidentally, that contest is on Tuesday in Alabama, runoff between Judge Roy Moore, who is ahead in the polls, and Big Luther Strangelove. How strange can you be? The only thing Strangelove could say was about 25 or 30 times he was supported by the president. But yet when DJ Trump was there ranting and raving about SOBs, etc., he told the crowd he may have made a mistake in endorsing Luther Strangelove. In other words, he threw Big Luther onto the bus and effectively drove off. I mean, this is strange. We've not had a day in American football or in sports, period, where teams have showed a solidarity in a protest. Now, the arm linking itself is solidarity, the team behind a social justice. It really doesn't matter if you go down on one knee, put up a clenched fist. The people understand what the people are doing, period. Terry Bradshaw, he's a former quarterback and an NFL turned analyst, used to be on CBS. I don't know where he is now. This is America. If our country stands for anything, it's freedom. People died for that freedom, no doubt about it. And I'm not sure if our president understands those rights. He no doubt does not. And for Mark Davis, he is at the Oakland Raiders. I can no longer ask our team to not say something while they are in Raider uniform. The only thing I can ask them to do is with a class. They do it with pride. Not only do we have to tell people there is something wrong, we have to come up with answers. And this is kind of a roundup from the Green Bay Packers. Of course, they're owned by the people of Green Bay. The president there, Mark Murphy. It is unfortunate that the president decided to use his immediate platform to make divisive and offensive statements about our players in the NFL. From the Indianapolis Colts, the owner there, Jim Irsay. I'm troubled by President's recent remarks about our league and about sports. Sports in America has a unique ability to bring people from all walks of life, from different point of views, together to work towards the root of a common goal. The Indianapolis Colts are proud to be part of that tradition in our home city and state. From Stephen Ross, he is the co-owner of the Dolphins. Our country needs uniting leadership right now and not divisiveness. Stevie Wonder in New York took a knee also in Central Park. That was on Saturday. Both knees in prayer for the continent, our future, and leaders of our world and globe. Amen, he said, and that's with Stevie. So that is a roundup of what happened in the NFL on Sunday. Needs very little quarterbacking. We go back to Justice Jackson, who set the tone, to Mr. Carlos and Smith in Mexico City at the Olympics. And in 1968, we were in the still infancy of television. We were just getting from black and white to color. We had color, but the whole point is this. Now we have high def. And this is beyond those that attend NFL games. This has went into the newspaper as a story, a cause celeb, if you want to call it that, and all types of outlets are reporting on it that would normally not be doing, quote-unquote, the Sunday football play around the league. So this in itself is very dynamic. Appreciative of Mr. Colin Kaepernick for bringing it up. But it's no longer just one player named Colin Kaepernick out there. There are many, many players out there, and now the teams in solidarity, whether it's linking of the arms, everybody knows what it's about. It's about Colin Kaepernick and his struggles. And that leaves a lot of people, thanks to DJ Trump, out there in a position that they would not really want to be in. Now, as far as Major League Baseball is concerned, it is not the day of Jackie Robinson. Fewer and fewer African Americans are now involved in a Major League Baseball. And these are what we term side issues to be brought up.
At the StubHub Center, the Los Angeles Chargers joined together to link arms during the national anthem. Kareem Hunt of the Chiefs sat down with his hand over his heart. Some Chargers...
Now, this is the charges there in just heard a little bit of it come in here. But this is ESPN. Virtuals all across the NFL, from Lambeau Field to London, declared an unemployed quarterback named Colin Kaepernick as the biggest winner of the day, no doubt. But this was Kaepernick's defining moment Sunday, far more significant than the two playoff conquests of Mr. Aaron Rodgers, the NFL champion game victory in 2013. Dozens of players took to their knee during the anthem, and this was throughout the league. Professional football players weren't alone in expressing their dissent over the weekend, and they mentioned Mr. Bruce Maxwell here of the NFL. The entire Garfield High School team took a knee. That's in Seattle. Garfield High School is the high school that Bruce Lee went to, and also a performer named Jimi Hendrix. Having lived in Seattle, we know these things. If we don't protest, how we are going to get our voices heard? That is from Martin Bosco, the first African American to start as a pro football quarterback, told the ESPN by phone, "I support everything Kaepernick and those who follow him have done." Nicknamed the magician, let me get that right, Mr. Bosco was busy to his Long Beach, California home, watching Deshaun Watson, that's Houston's rookie quarterback, take on Tom Brady. Bosco thinks Watson played his style of football, but the rules of engagement have dramatically changed for African American quarterbacks over the past 50 years. In 1968, after the Denver Broncos of the old American Football League drafted him as a defensive back, Bosco had to insist on a 3-day tryout at a quarterback position at Omaha University. Bosco aced the tryout and ultimately set a Broncos rookie season with 14 touchdown passes on 5 starts. Joe Namath 14, and Joe Namath threw 15 that year, and in 14 starts. Now, in 5 starts, you can see the difference there. Back to Joe Namath. He never played because of the a quarterback since Pop Warner's days. Bosco was forced to leave Denver and switched to wide receiver, a position he never played because of the color of his skin. He became a star receiver for the Buffalo Bills and 2-time champion with the Miami Dolphins. Athletes are always supposed to be barefoot and pregnant in my time, Bosco said. We weren't supposed to express our views outside of going on the field and playing football. When I was coming up, you couldn't have a black quarterback, center, or middle linebacker. All of these positions, when you were in school and as a teacher asked what you wanted to be when you grew up, a white kid would say, "I want to be president." You would never hear a black kid say that, including myself. Racism has softened over time, but it hasn't been eradicated. And to some of the same concerns, experiences for African Americans in 2017 that we had in 1968. This is back a connection of history back to what John Carlos was talking about and Smith. For African Americans who can't throw or catch a ball or shoot a basketball or get their music out, there is a helplessness that they feel as a people. A retired director of the Boys and Girls Club, those are usually positions that former athletes get, in Long Beach, and a former financial broker, Bosco said that he has been sober for 25 years after battling a drug addiction that left him at times homeless and in jail. He said that his white offensive linemen in Denver and most of the South all rallied around him and told each other, don't let them touch the magician. As proud as he was of Watson, Cam Newton, and other African-American quarterbacks who followed him, Bosco is encouraged by the support offered to today's protesters by white teammates and co-workers. It's not just African-Americans speaking out, it is society as a whole. He said, back in the day, we were alone in our own protests and our own pain. Not this Sunday. The show of solidarity was a blowout victory for Colin Kaepernick, no doubt about that. And that left Trump in Alabama alone. Nonviolent protest in America as it gets. That is from the Ravens' Terry Stuggies. After Jacksonville's 44-47 victory in London. So we threw in a few scores here, but the sights and sounds that endured above all of these that projected unity between white and black, employer and employee. They started on social media when Mr. Rogers and Mr. Brady posted hashtag messages of love and brotherhood and photos of Brady about how to encourage black teenagers, and Rogers kneeling with white and black Packers. They continued in the field where fans could see the Lions' 92-year-old owner, Martha Ford, locking arms with a 62-year-old head coach, Jim Carswell. Anyway, 92 years old. I didn't know she was 92. But this is what America is all about. Let's do the baseball scores now. The Twins were in the Motor City, a good place to be. 10-4 was the scores. Twins over the Tigers. The Yankees were in Toronto. Toronto 9-5. The White Sox were in Cincy. Sox 5-4. The Nationals were in New York. Nationals 3-2 in the contest. The Rays were in Camden Yard. Orioles 9-4. The Phillies were in Atlanta and shut Atlanta out 2-0. The Cardinals were in Pittsburgh. Pirates 4-1. The Cubs, of course, were in Milwaukee and shut the Brewers out 5-0. The Cubs had 10 hits and no errors, and the Brewers 3 hits and no errors. The Royals were on the south side of Chicago. White Sox 8-1. The Rangers were out in Oakland. Athletics 8-1 there. Excuse me. The Giants were in Los Angeles. Dodgers 3-1 there. Mr. Kershaw was a winner. And Stratton was a loser. Anyway, Cleveland was in Seattle, and 4-2 was the score. Cleveland over the Mariners. The Marlins and D-backs in Arizona, 3-2 D-backs. The Rockies and Padres down in San Diego. Rockies 8-4. That's a wild card race for the first and second wild card. And the Angels and Astros. The Angels pulled this one out, but they are virtually out of the wild card race. 7-5. Let's quickly look at the standings here. In the American League East, it's the Red Sox. They've already clinched. The Yankees have clinched also. They are 5 back. So they're all on the way. In the Central, the American League, it's Cleveland. And the Twins are 16 games back there. In the West, it's all Houston. They have done it. In the National League East, it is the Nationals and the Cubs. I think are 2 games. They have 2 games to clinch. And Milwaukee is 5.5 games back. In the National League West, the Dodgers have won theirs, and the Arizona Diamondbacks have got a berth also. So the D-backs are on the way, and this is where we stand on the 25th of September 2017. Have a good week, everyone. We'll talk to you soon. We'll have a special program, incidentally, on the runoff in Alabama, Mr. Luford Strangelove, and Judge Roy Moore.